Relationship. We're going to break up into some groups after each of this. Relationship. Now, relationship, it's important to talk about power and thinking about these relationships. I think about Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and really influenced a lot of my thinking about education and art in a big way. And the essential idea is in the relationships in our classrooms, Paulo Freire said oftentimes they're based on a lie. They're based on the lie that the teacher knows everything and the student knows. And we know that's not true, but we still act as if this lie has some validity. So he says we don't need that type of banking concept of education. He says the banking concept of education is backwards. People are not ATM machines. You don't just deposit all your ideas into their head and then ask them to, like, you know, give it back to you when you type in your code and give them a test, right? You know, people are folks back in the day knew this, right? Don't nobody know everything, but everybody knows something. So every good teacher should acknowledge they can be a good student. As one of my colleagues just said, the Zen idea is that you start with the new beginning, the new mind, the beginner's mind, okay? All right, so teachers have to be open to learning from their students and create the possibility that students can learn from each other and create the possibility that students can be good teachers as well as good students, all right? So that's the different model, what he calls the revolutionary model of education rather than the banking concept of education. That's what we want to think about as a possibility for our educational spaces. The pedagogy of the oppressed, these oppressive contexts in which young people learn, you know, not only oppress them, but also oppress the oppressors. It puts teachers in a situation where you're forced to feel like, I have to know everything, otherwise I've failed. That's not fair to you. That's not fair to you. It's not fair to me. I don't want that pressure, all right? I don't know it all. I'll get back to you. I'll go Google, figure out what I don't know, and I get back to you, right? But students can also share in that process in a more dynamic way. And I won't go into detail, but Yvette Jackson from NUA talks about the pedagogy of confidence, how if we believe in our young people, that they come into the classroom with certain power, with certain abilities, with certain understanding, with a wealth. We have an abundance consciousness rather than a scarcity consciousness. We can create a more dynamic space in which to engage. So I want to throw out a question before we go into our first breakout section and discuss this concept and how it applies to each of our classes. I want to throw out a question that I'm going to perform a piece to move us towards an answer on. The question is, and I have to introduce this properly. I want to make sure that I do justice. The question is, what if our separation is an illusion and our interconnectedness is actually the reality? Right, what does that mean for the kinds of relationships that we build? What does that mean for the energy that we create, the tone that we set in our classrooms? If our separation from each other is an illusion and the reality is that we're actually all connected, whether you saw Avatar or not, right? Think about that for a second, and I want to share this piece with you to move us into our conversations and attempts to think of an answer. And this piece is what I think about as a response I would have given had I been Muhammad Ali when he was at Ground Zero years ago. Ground Zero is in the news a lot now because of this whole mosque issue. Folks don't talk about the fact that there was actually a mosque there before anyway, but you know, it's an election year, so folks will do what they do. But a reporter asked Muhammad Ali, he said, you know, hey, how do you feel sharing the same faith as people who did this? And Ali, the champ, isn't what he once was, but he still came back with the 1-2. He said, how do you feel sharing the same faith as Hitler? And the reporter tucked his tail between his legs and walked away, as well he should, right? Because to ascribe the fanaticism of a particular group to everybody in that group is just as wrong as to claim that, you know, Christians are terrorists because crosses are burned in lawns or black churches are burned in the South, as they have in very recent memory, right? So whether it's based on religion or race or sexuality or gender, that type of hypocrisy is unacceptable, and Ali let him know that. And I wouldn't have had the presence of mind to say what he said, but I hope that if I were presented with that question that I would have had a response something like this. When I had never seen the scriptures encrypted in the leaves of trees, when I never heard hymns hummed in harmony by a colony of bees, before I came to see that elders are angels sent to watch over me, I used to worship in the temple. I used to sacrifice in the sanctuary. But in my youth, I got the gospel truth from a blade of grass. Witnessed the wisdom of the water running in my bath. Wind was my religion, telling the future of my past. I used to worship in the temple. I used to recite psalms in the synagogue until a woman who had a way with words made me want to do away with words. Perform poetry on me without saying a single word. Strumming sonnets on the strings that sing the song of my manhood. Strumming sonnets on the strings that sing the song of my soul. As good as worship in the temple. I used to worship in the temple. I used to worship in the temple. I used to take offerings to the altar until my altar's ego let me know he was no hero at all. And I saw spring spread her legs for summer as a old man. Winter fell in love with fall. As an unborn butterfly tried to find himself inside his self-spun cocoon. Just as I had way back when I used to worship in the womb, where I discovered my mother's perspiration developed the power to liberate developing nations, because she baptized 5 boys with 2 fists full of lightning and spoke in 7 tongues of thunder to resurrect my cousin crucified by the cocaine grave he was under when he used to worship in the temple. I used to worship in the temple. I used to worship in the temple. I used to sing service in the mosque where Karma couldn't catch a cab on the corner of the cross unless she double-crossed Krishna for 30 pieces of Shiva, meditated with mantras under mangoes, contemplated Siddhartha and the Kango, because the Kango looks like a halo on a Negro whenever we go out to eat angel hair pasta. Or sit beside a Rasta blasting reggae remixes of Rumi out his radio, translating revelations back into Ebonics from Igbo before chanting Nam Yoho Rengekyo, Nam Yoho Rengekyo, Nam Yoho Rengekyo, Nam Yoho Rengekyo. Ancient jive for everything is everything, because everything says so. So holy water is no holier than the water in your well right now. Church bells are no holier than cowrie shells on the ground. Rosary beads are no holier than dime bags of weed somehow. Yesterday and tomorrow are no holier than now, because now and then Buddha be coming back in the newborn body of a blue-black baby. St. Mary is blind, crippled, and crazy, lit out of the box like an old bag lady. Shango shoots up tornadoes to shoot the breeze with Jesus Christ, Persephone, and Ogum, and Menage a Trois with the moon as soon as you go to bed at night. But I see skies of blue. Have you gotten the gospel truth from a blade of grass? Clouds of white. Witness the wisdom of the water running in your bath. Bright, blessed days. Is wind your religion, telling the future of your past. Dark, sacred nights. I used to worship the temple and sacrifice in the sanctuary. And I think to myself, I used to worship the temple and sing service in the mosque. What a wonderful world. I used to worship the temple and recite psalms in the synagogue. And I think to myself, I used to worship the temple. I used to worship the temple. What a wonderful world. I used to worship the temple. I used to worship the temple. I used to worship the temple. I used to worship the temple until I realized everything around me is God. So you have 5 minutes to think about relationship, and the question I want to add, the answer that I want to propose is that our relationships would be radically different if we saw the face of God on each other and on every child in our classroom.